Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to the third edition of the Hong Kong View with myself and Tim Carroll. Tim, it's been a week since I last spoke to you. How have things been for you?
Yeah, well, it's been a bad week for racing, as we know. It's been pretty difficult, to be honest. And as far as the actual racing goes, I had a pretty good day at Happy Valley yesterday with 4 winners, but unfortunately the Nap ran second. I had it going in a fairly chunky acca, so that was a little bit disappointing. But yeah, it's been good overall.
I think the best place to start in racing would be this week. It's perhaps been it's been a dark week for the sport, and unless you've been living under a rock for the past 4 to 5 days or even longer, you'd have seen the sickening pictures coming out on social media late Saturday evening of Gordon Elliott posing rather, shall we say, stupidly on a dead horse that was being trained by him, and it's all blown up out of proportion during the week. Gordon Elliott has lost various different horses with Cheveley Park, notably Envoy Allen, who's on course to perhaps win at the Cheltenham Festival in the Marsh. But Tim, it's just been an absolute mess of a week, and I'm really lost for words, to be honest.
Yeah, look, it's difficult to defend, isn't it? I come from a rural background. Just to put this into context, I mean, I grew up in the country and we used to go out shooting and that type of thing. And when I say that, I'm not talking about with a slab of beer and that sort of thing. I mean, we used to go out animal control, basically. Blame you guys, actually, Luca, going back, I don't know, 150 years ago or something. Some Englishman decided he missed rabbit shooting, took a few rabbits out to Australia, and the next thing you know, we literally had 3 billion of them, and they were destroying the land, and they were causing all sorts of problems. And it's not just the farmers' land, it was also other livestock kept putting their foot down, rabbit holes and breaking legs and that type of thing. So, look, anyway, the point I'm making there, I'm not a soft touch. If you work in rural areas, you see a few things, but that one did shock me a little bit for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think if you work with animals, okay, let's be honest. If you work on a farm or you deal with livestock, you probably become a little bit more hardened to a few different things. But you look after the animals well, or you should, and by all reports and everything I've read, that's exactly what Gordon does. But you also show them respect. And as a lot of people have said, that's not just in life, that's in death as well. So, you can't defend it. And it makes it really difficult for the industry because, as we know, we're constantly under attack, mostly unfairly, but sometimes there's some valid points raised. But our defence has always been, basically, if it wasn't for racing, these horses wouldn't even have a life. I don't know about over here, but if you look in places like America and Australia, a horse in captivity, certainly a racehorse has a longer life expectancy and a better quality of life, I would suggest, than one in the wild. And we love them and look after them so well. A picture like that flies in the face. I mean, I've got family members who, they're certainly not the mob that hate absolutely everything, but they question things, and they'll look at something like this and say, Tim, you keep telling me these horses are so well looked after, and then they'll show you a picture that explain this, and you can't defend it. So it's distressing, it's sad, it makes you angry, and I suppose that once you get over the initial shock and everything's happened last week. The other thing we do need to say here, I mean, Gordon Elliott is, he's had a nightmare week. I don't know the man himself, so I don't know how he's dealing with it, but I would imagine you'd have to be Superman not to be in a fairly dark place at the moment. So we also need to be very careful. We need to put everything in the context. It's bad for the image of racing. I don't understand why anybody would do it, let alone someone involved in racing that supposedly love these animals and build up relationships with them. But we've got to remember, no one's been killed. As far as we know, no one or no horse has been hurt. We've just got to be a little bit careful. There's a due process that will need to be followed. Let that due process play out.
I think that what upset a lot of people was about the whole matter was the first sort of apology that Gordon released. And it was almost many people, and I saw a video as well from somebody on social media, basically saying it was almost an insult of intelligence, where he claimed to take a call, sit on the horse, and a member of staff, he happened to gesture the 2 fingers up. And I think a lot of us know that probably wasn't the case. And it upset a lot of people because the next day he released a statement being more sincere. And it's kind of raised a thought to me that if he did that in the first place, it might have gave him a tiny little bit more respect for being honest about it and being upfront, rather than perhaps trying to insult everyone's intelligence and perhaps trying to cover it up.
Yeah, look, I don't know. I don't know the process there, but whoever advised Gordon, I would imagine he's sitting down and talking to his major owners and whatnot, close friends and family. But I would imagine whoever advised him there advised him badly, because it didn't really sound like the sort of apology we should have been getting. If you go, unfortunately, if you go a few days later when we saw the one with young Rob James. In fairness to him, as stupid as that is, as well, as sad as that is, as bad as it is for the industry again, at least his apology, you'd like to think it's authentic, but at least his apology was what you would expect to read afterwards. So I agree, and I don't think he did himself any favours there. The real shame about all of this is, apart from the fact that, you see something like that and you just think that's disgusting, the shame of it all, apart from the fact that it damages the image of the sport and the fact that we've obviously got people prepared to do this sort of thing within the sport, the real shame for me is Gordon Elliott is such a wonderful story. I mean, he's a man who's come from nowhere, and that's really difficult to do in horse racing, especially in this part of the world where, dare I say, it's a bit cliquey. He's come from nowhere and he's built an empire. And I don't know, every time I see him interviewed, he comes across as just a knockabout guy that you'd enjoy sitting down and having a pint with. But it is what it is, and as I said, let the due process play out. Let's not look for a lynching like some members of the public are. I understand people are angry. I get that. The racing media are going to be angry because they're the ones who've got to defend it yet again. We've had so many, not just here, Navarro service in America, Darren Weir not so long ago in Australia, and you get sick of defending it. So, but let the process take its place. And hopefully everybody, not just the people involved here, but anybody in racing, and I know it's an old cliche, but I know from working at the coal front, 99% of people in racing do the right thing. They love these horses and they look after them well. You go down the stable, and I promise you there's boys and girls down there looking after those horses better than they look after their own partners. And that's God's honest truth. But let's just hope for the people who maybe think this sort of thing beforehand was acceptable, the horse is dead, who cares, rah. Hopefully people are learning a lesson.
I think just before we move on, this time of year for National Hunt racing is always its hardest time because you have Cheltenham and the Grand National all within, say, 6 weeks for each other. And the antibody and the anti-racing people do tend to come out in force around this time of year. And for me personally, as a big lover of National Hunt racing, it's extremely sad because we get enough grief as it is during this time of year without something like this now coming along to sort of add more flames to the fire. And from somebody who's grown up loving racing, like I went to the racing school at 16. It didn't work out for me. I grew too tall. But coming from somebody who's been around horses and knows how it works, it's just disappointing to see the public perception's now going to probably be at an all-time low. Yeah,
for sure. And the other thing is too, mark my words, these pictures we've seen in the last week are going to be rolled out by the We Hate Everything mob for the next 5-10 years. And again, it's one of those ones you can't defend. It's like Darren Weir at Australia. It's like the American trainers who did the wrong thing, Navarro and Service. You can't defend those sort of actions. But the point I will make here as well, you've got to remember, if someone goes and kicks their pet dog, it doesn't mean everybody who owns a dog is an animal abuser or is a bad person. And again, I just want to make the point, I'm certainly not trying to downplay it. I don't know, it's intriguing how they're going to deal with it because it's a really odd offence. I can't think of anything similar. I would imagine it's going to be along the lines of bringing the sport into disrepute, which is basically, in a roundabout way, is what Charles Burns got a 6-month suspension for. They sort of bordered around, my understanding anyway, sort of in a backdoor way, but it's a really difficult one because it's just something I've never seen before, certainly not in racing anyway. I mean, I've seen people do wrong things and disrespectful things and cruel things with horses, but it's just really odd. And I suppose, you just kind of got to wonder what was going through Gordon's head his mind, I should say, at the time. It's really odd. But there's been a lot of things on media, and myself. I mean, when I saw the second one, I basically said, for God's sake, get your house in order. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know that the sport we love is just going to cop it now, left, right, and centre. And there's a lot of people out there that want this sport stopped tomorrow. And we are constantly defending. You've got to remember, even with boxing, you can say, oh, it's brutal, it shouldn't happen. But the bottom line is, if two people want to jump in the ring and they want to get paid for that, that's their choice. The argument from the anti-racing mob is that it's a cruel sport and the animals have got no choice, which I don't buy into, but that's what they're saying. And again, we're just giving them more fuel for the fire.
And just finally, I think on the matter, If I was Gordon Elliott, in my opinion, I saw Ted Walsh say that perhaps he could do with taking a break for a while. In my opinion, I think that would probably be best for him. I think just to step out of the firing line for God knows how long, maybe 6 months, hand his licence in, regroup and come back again. Because I can imagine losing such quality horses such as Emboy Allen and horses like Sir Gerhard, especially on top of Cheltenham. It must be an absolute crushing blow for the stable staff too, who've worked so hard with these horses all year round, and then one act of stupidity, and the next day or the next couple of days later, they're taken off in a lorry to Henry de Bromhead and Willie Mullins. It must be terrible for them.
Yeah, it would be. As far as Gordon goes, though, I don't think the biggest issue for him is losing good horses. I think at the moment you've got a man who's, as I said, has come from nowhere, has built up an incredible empire, racing empire. Until now, has got, as far as I know anyway, has got a very good reputation. And if you get to the top like he has, it's a big fall when you come down, you know. And I sincerely mean this. I hope Gordon's got a lot of support at the moment, because you can't forgive what you saw. But at the end of the day, it is a mistake. It's a bad mistake. It is. But let's just hope he's all right and he can recover. Now, whether he takes a break, I mean, I've got a feeling that the powers that be will be giving him the forced layoff anyway. What he does, I just think he needs to do the best thing for him. And I am a great believer, unless it's an offence, you know, like murder or something, I'm a great believer in giving everyone a second chance. And I hope he does come back at some point. But again, hopefully lesson learned, a better person for it. He's not the first person to make a mistake. We've all been there. But when you make mistakes, you've got to pay the consequences.
And just finally, as on the matter, obviously Tiger Earl's taken out the Grand National. But for me, the Tiger Earl story sums up how good of a horseman Gordon Elliott is. You look at his first national win, but the second one for me was just really, really good. The whole season, Tiger Earl was in the form of his life. He hacked up in the Grade 2 hurdle. He won the cross country by an absolute street. I was firmly against him winning a second national. I was really thinking that he couldn't do it. And then when he crossed the Melling Road second time, I sat on my head in my hands, really, because Davy Russell was pulling double handful, and I was thinking to myself, oh, for God's sake. But I think it really sums up how much of a horseman Gordon Elliott is, to get a horse back and to win a second national, but to win it with so much in hand. I think that's what people hopefully will not forget, that this man is a good horseman, and most importantly, he can train horses to a good level.
Yeah, look, anybody can get a hold of one or two good horses and do good things with them. But Gordon's won, you know, all races. He's even won good races on the flat. And when you have a look at his amount of winners in the big races he's won, he's done it in a relatively short space of time. Some of the biggest owners in the sport have backed him, and that's always an indication as well. I don't think there's any doubt that he's a wonderful trainer as far as his results go. And by all accounts, I mean, I'm not as big on the national hunt scene as, say, yourself and a few other people, but by all accounts, his horses look superb on race day, and that's always an indication of a trainer's ability as well. But yeah, he's a wonderful trainer who's made a big mistake.
So moving on now, something hopefully a bit more better to talk about now over at Sha Tin on Sunday. We'll start things off with Vincey. He broke his Hong Kong duck. I think it was over 20 races. A former two-time winner, I do believe, in Ireland, but he finally got off the mark, and something nice to talk about after slightly sorer subjects this week.
Yeah, he put in a couple of decent runs. Look, I didn't flag him up in the race, but I thought the race actually set up very well for him. But that's generally the case, especially in Hong Kong. But you know, he deserved to win. He's been very consistent. I don't think he's going to go into any great shakes, but the bottom line is, now that he's won one, you quite often see it'll take him a while to sort of land one, and then they go on and win a few. Plus, the other thing you've got to remember in Hong Kong, some horses do actually take a while to sort of settle in. So they should have a little bit of fun with him going forward. He's going to cop a bit of a penalty, though, as you would expect.
So in the Class 2, it's all the big race of the day. Harley Proactive narrowly turned over California Deep Shot. A bit of a ding-dong up the home straight with Carriage Teton, who in my opinion was very strong in the finish to get his horse home. I thought Beauty Smile was just a tad disappointing in third. Didn't seem to get the gaps when he wanted to. Stayed on quite well, but on the whole, when the gaps don't appear, it can be hard for a horse to really get any sort of momentum.
Yeah, it probably was a little bit disappointing, but it's one of those sort of races. I mean, Hong Kong is tight racing when you're talking about those sort of levels. It's kind of the horse that's rightly weighted that gets the best run, the smoothest commute, and that type of thing. It's one of those sort of things. It's people say, oh, they take it in turns winning. I don't quite buy into that. It's quite often, if you're talking about a tightly contested handicap, bottom line is you've got to try to work out how the race is going to set up, and that's why probably you can run it 5 times and get 3 or 4 different results.
So looking ahead to also Fantastic Way, one at the weekend as well. Joe Moreira, in my opinion, gave two great rides, Fantastic Way and Silver Express, so we'll touch upon later on. But John Styes has got a nice 3-rod on his hands in Fantastic Way. 2 wins from 2, and he won here with what looked to be plenty in hand as well.
Impressive performance, jumped from 13. He had cover, to be fair, but he was planted 3 wide the entire way. He ended up winning. I think it was by, if I remember correctly, by about a length, but he was untouched all the way down the straight. Looked to have something in the locker as well. He's been given a £7 hike for that, so it means in 2 starts he's gone up £17 in the handicap. Looks straightforward. Should be plenty of improvement forthcoming as well.
Also in the final race, Silver Express, the blinkers worked this time out. Last time out, he ran all over the place. He couldn't run in a straight line. It made it very difficult for Joe. But this time the blinkers on, Joe threw out the gates and in commentary nailed into the rail. It was a very good piece of riding. And the blinkers really seemed to just help him concentrate. And when he put it all together, he looks a very good horse. There's touting of him going to the Derby, but to go from a Class 3 to a Hong Kong Derby in a couple of weeks is a very big jump to him.
It is, and it's really interesting because John Styes won the Hong Kong Derby in 2018 with a horse called Ping Hai Star, and he actually came off 3 runs over 7 furlongs, then stepped up to the 10 furlongs and won the Derby. With this horse, I don't see it, though, to be fair. At least with Ping Hai Star, a couple of things. Prior to those 3 runs, he had been over a mile. And secondly, most importantly, all of those 3 runs over the 7 furlongs, he was coming from the back and running over the top of them, whereas this horse led on the weekend. As far as his pedigree goes, I mean, he's by Canford Cliffs out of an Elvestrom mare, so certainly on pedigree, he's probably a fair old chance of running the 10 furlongs at Sha Tin. But to be honest with you, he went from the front the other day. If it wasn't for the fact it was John Styes, I would say no hope in the Derby, because he just didn't give me the impression he was a horse looking for 10 furlongs, maybe in time, but certainly not at the moment. But he was impressive on the weekend regardless, and wherever they go, you'd certainly take note.
Now, sticking with Joe Moreira at the weekend, I was very impressed with some of those rides. The Silver Express ride, in my opinion, was very good. To break out early and to deal with a horse who's perhaps got a tendency to sort of roll around in front, but he made it look so easy. And I think he's closing on his century of winners for the season. It looks as though he's going to win the Jockeys' Championship. And on the whole, it's been a superb season for Joe after losing the title last season to Zac Purton.
Yeah, I think he's on 95 winners. He's probably on course to break the record as well. He certainly was last time I had a look, provided he stops getting bans. He's had to serve one recently, but he is a wonderful rider. I mean, you don't go over to Hong Kong and become the champion rider purely on luck. He did the same in Singapore. I remember watching him ride an 8-timer in Singapore. I think there was 9 races. I'll stand corrected. I think there was 9 races on the card, and the only one he didn't win was an apprentice race he couldn't ride in. It was an incredible performance. But he's a lovely rider. He's very well balanced. Horses travel so strongly for him. He's not one of these sort of riders, as you know, the rules with the whip in Hong Kong aren't as strict as they are over here, but he's not one of these sort of riders that knocks 20 bells out of a horse or anything like that. He's pretty to watch, and he puts them in good spots. He's very good from the front, judges pace very well, but he's also very good riding them from the back as well. He's just an all-round rider. The other thing too, he's got a little bit of an advantage over Zac, is he's a natural lightweight, so he can ride anything in Hong Kong and he can ride anything without wasting.
So moving into Happy Valley yesterday, we'll start things off with All Best Friends for Alex Lai. It's been a long time in between drinks for Alex in terms of winners, but he came late down the outside and mugged the Casper Found's favourite, Tailor Made. And it must be good to see for Alex. He's had a long time without a winner, so to get that winner, it must have been a good achievement for him.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, he's not in the same class as the riders we were just talking about. But you tend to find in Hong Kong, if you're not riding winners on a regular basis, you basically get forgotten. If you go through his rides, I promise you, they probably average out at 33 to 1 over the last 12 months. Well, I don't care if you're the love child of Ryan Moore and Lester Piggott. If you're riding 33 to 1 pops every time you go around, you're probably not riding a lot of winners. He's certainly, like a lot of them that are at the bottom of the rungs there, he's certainly better than his record would suggest. But it was good to see, because these people, they work very hard. They work as hard as the successful riders, and you certainly don't begrudge them a win when they get one, even if it was one I didn't back.
We'll see it moving into the next race. Of course, Nunchucks was a very impressive winner. I like this ride from Vincent Ho. Sort of off the pace turning in, but he is a very strong, typically aggressive Vincent Ho ride. He wound up Nunchucks and he duly picked up and won going away quite comfortably. And the money was down for him and the favouritism obliged.
Yeah, one of four winners we flagged up yesterday, so I was pretty pleased with that one myself. He looked the logical one, though. I thought the race would set up nicely for him, and it did. He's very, very consistent. And look, I did flag him up, but he probably won a little bit easier than what I thought he would. He actually won easier than what I thought he was going to when they got to about 3 furlongs out. I mean, I'm not saying he was in trouble or anything, but he's just been pushed along a little bit. But once he saw a bit of daylight, he really found a change of gear, and he'll cop a decent old penalty for that, but he'll be interesting going forward again.
In terms of his consistency as well, he's won 3 times this season, been second once and third once, I think it was. So for a horse of his ability, he's ultra consistent. And from a betting point of view, when perhaps you're sticking with nunchucks, 9 times out of 10, you must have an idea that he's probably going to run a solid race.
Yeah, for now. The problem is, it's like over here. You generally pay for that consistency. And again, I'll get back to the point I made. The reason I really liked him yesterday is I knew the race would set up nicely for him, and it did. We'll have to watch what the excessor decides. I mean, he's going to, as I said, he's going to cop a penalty for that, which will bring him back to the field a little bit. But he is a very consistent type, and middle of his race, you say. Certainly in recent times, anyway. He started the career off a little bit slowly, but in recent times, you're going to get a run for your money.
Also, it'd be rude not to mention the Zac Purton 5-timer yesterday. Dominated the racing yesterday over in Happy Valley. Hurry again was possibly the most eye-catching winner of the day. This 3-year-old broke out nicely. It was a very good Zac Purton ride, in my opinion. He sat behind the leaders off the pace and a little shake of the reins, and off he went. It was all very easy, and he looks like a horse who perhaps could go on to bigger and better things than a class 4.
Yeah, first time around the bend as well. Again, he was one of the winners we had yesterday. I can't believe I think he went off at about 9-2, 5-1, depending on where you were shopping, which surprised me because his first run was over the straight course at Sha Tin down the straight over the 5 furlongs. He put in a really good round. He finished second there, and they sort of had, stepping up to 6 furlongs written all over it. Now, I suppose you don't know about them going around the bend until you see it, but working on the theory that he was going to go around the bend without a problem, considering he'd work every morning around the bend. I kind of thought he'd be nearly favourite, but got a good price, very promising as you say, given it was only his second start, one with a bit in hand as well, with a fair bit in hand actually. You'd have to think, again he's going to cop a hefty penalty, but you'd have to think he'll be very much well worth following going forward.
Also, yesterday we had no João Moreira nor Neil Callan as well, but for Zac to take advantage of that, he's now on to 70 winners for the season. He's still a significant amount behind Joe, but you've got to take advantage, haven't you? When a rider doesn't ride like Joe, to take advantage, to sort of eat into that lead, it was a good night for Zac on the whole. Yeah,
I think, to be fair, look, it's very unlikely this year, especially if Joe stays fit and healthy. But I think at one point last season, he got about 12, 14 behind Joe, and he picked him up and ended up running away, so to speak. I can't see it this season, but he's a quality rider. I've followed Zac since his young days in Australia. I mean, he hit the ground running. He always looked like he was going to be a promising rider. And when he went to Hong Kong, I think most people in Australia anyway had no doubt he was going to kick a few goals, and that's exactly how it worked out. And without a shadow of a doubt, it's like horses. It's a little bit difficult to get a handle on the form when they're all sort of running in different areas, but there's no doubt Zac is one of the elite riders in the world. And if, for instance, he came over here and did a few years with the right support, I've got no doubt he'd kick a few goals over here as well. He's just that sort of rider.
And talking of the last race, Savakin was smashed into very short favouritism, obviously perhaps due to Zac Purton being on course for a 6-timer. It didn't work out. Farshad reversed the form with him and turned him over, but not only just, and I think another couple of strides, Savakin would have mugged him on the line. And I think it let you down for a big paycheck as well, Tim.
I had an knacker going. People who sort of follow my column on the ATR website, and when the racing's on, I'm online, and he would have been the fourth leg of something for a very small bet that was worth just in the 5 figures actually. But anyway, and to be fair, I'm not making excuses. I'm talking purely with my neutral hat on. To be fair, the race didn't actually set up too well for him. Some people were critical of the ride. I'm actually not. He drew high. He was always going to be ridden from the second half of the field. Unfortunately, Zac sort of got to the point where he had to decide, does he go around the outside and hope he's got enough because he went off top weight, or do you look for the runs up on the inside and ride him for luck? And he's gone for the former. And what he really needed was a horse to drag him into the race. If he had a horse to drag him into the race, he would have won it. If he goes up the inside, who knows? If he gets the breaks, he would have won it because he was only just a 9. But I think it was more kind of race set up to beat him on the day. And even though he was turned over, for the time being, I do think he's worth following going forward. He'll cop £2 or £3 for that, but with a softer commute, he'll be winning again.
Looking at back at last week, the barrier trials, we saw Classique Legend, the Everest winner. He came out and trialled during the week. It was a very nice trial, in my opinion. He picked up quite nicely in what was a relatively small field. If you're Casper Founds now, and you've got Classic Legend and of course Athero, if I'm Casper Founds, I'm perhaps sitting there thinking, if I can get these two horses back to their best or anywhere near their best, I'm perhaps sitting on both two of the best Hong Kong sprinters within my roster.
Oh, look, if they get Athero back to his best, he's definitely got the two best sprinters in the Hong Kong. Both are on retrieval missions. Athero, no fault of his own through injury, and Classique Legend. Actually, I would say no fault of his own as well. If you have a look at that whole preparation into the international, they just stumped the high heaven, to be honest. He's rushed out of the Everest down to quarantine in Werribee over to Hong Kong, and usually because of the completely different conditions, they give him a little bit of time to acclimatise in Hong Kong. The big thing about the barrier trial, now, you can't read too much into a trial. It was only 4 runners, but the big thing is he moved really nicely. He won the trial. He sat out the back of the 4 and then he just went past them under a hole. He'd only ever had one trial prior to that, and that was leading into the international last year. And it was a small field as well. It was 6 runners. He just struggled. I remember saying at the time that, look, I know the horse's form, but I don't know anything about his track work in the mornings. But based on that trial, I would go near him for the international because he just looked awful, whereas he looked completely different in this trial. So let's hope he's back, because the owner has said that, if he strikes a bit of form in Hong Kong, as big as the money is, COVID aside, hopefully, he will travel him. He was talking about races like the Alquois, races like the Diamond Jubilee or the King Stand, and then also to go back to Australia and defend his Everest. Now, if the owner's good for his word and the horse does strike a bit of form and COVID doesn't prevent, you'd like to think we'll see this horse going all around the globe over the next 18 months. So fingers crossed. I really hope he does. If he hits his best form, I'm pretty sure, and I'll stand corrected, but I'm pretty sure that he ran the highest, him and Bivouac, who won the Newmarket, ran the 2 highest ratings over 6 furlongs anywhere in the world last year. So he's a serious horse when he's right.
So we spoke about, you just mentioned about the owner wanting to travel him. If he was to come to let's just, for example, if it was to work out in Hong Kong, he runs really well and he comes over here, with the possibility of an ageing Batash, would there be an opportunity over 5 furlongs, do you think, with his finishing kick? We saw in the Everest how fast he finishes off a strongly run pace. That sort of race could really be up his alley.
Well, the thing is, I think he could be aimed at the King Stand. I've always said this. A lot of the Australian horses that have failed in the Diamond Jubilee, it's because I've always said you'd be better off, unless they're a freak, you'd be better off bringing over a miler. We don't have anything like Ascot at home. Nothing is testing that. Nothing goes uphill like that. And a lot of these poor Australian horses, connections bring them over for this 6 furlong race. They can barely run 6.5 furlongs on a flat track. And they hit Ascot. They get a furlong out and go, what the bloody hell's going on here? But you made the point, with this horse, he is a finisher. So it'd be interesting to see whether they go for the King Stand, which I think he'd be effective at, because he is a finisher and you generally get a nice strong gallop. Or whether they go for the Diamond Jubilee. Now that the King Stand's a Group 1, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a Group 1 at Royal Ascot. So whereas in the past, I know some of the Australian horses go, well, hang on, it's a Group 2. We'd love to win a Group 2 at Royal Ascot, but by geez, we'd love to win a Group 1 at Royal Ascot even more. So it would be interesting. I think he could be aimed at either, although given that he's going to be running around in Hong Kong on flat tracks and that, who knows? I don't know which way they'd go if they came over here, but I don't mind. I'd just like to see him over here at the top of his game.
In terms of his running style, we mentioned about his finishing speed. He very much reminds me of a Chautauqua and how quick, and especially that Everest. I mean, Chautauqua was just an enigma and a freak in a way. His racing style was just unique, from coming from stupid distances from behind the pace, and it was almost computer game-esque the way in which he won certain races. But with Classique Legend, with the Australian horses, apart from maybe Choisir, I think it was, who won the Diamond Jubilee and also the King Stand, I think Redkirk Warrior came over. I think he was in the July Cup. I don't think he did too much. I think he ran at Ascot as well. But unless, apart from Black Caviar, do you think if they ran him over here in the Diamond Jubilee, as we mentioned before, the uphill 6 furlongs, will that perhaps just find him out, do you think?
I don't think it would if he was trained for it. I mean, you've got to remember Merchant Navy. Okay, he was trained by Aidan O'Brien and Star Spangled Banner both won it. So it's not like the Australian horses can't do it, but you've got to bring the right Australian horse. If their absolute maximum is 6 furlongs, don't go to the Diamond Jubilee. Believe you me. If their best trip is 6 furlongs, take them to the King Stand. If they can get a little bit further, and that's the thing, if you have a look, Star Spangled Banner won over a mile. Choisir, I'm pretty sure, won over a mile as well. Black Caviar won over 7 furlongs, and Peter Moody was always adamant, and let's not forget we didn't really see Black Caviar, not the real Black Caviar, Royal Ascot. Peter Moody, and I actually believe him, was always adamant she could run a mile to a mile and a quarter, but because she had the problem she had being such a big filly, he couldn't train her too hard, so he had to keep her to sprinting. He just couldn't move away from it. And they're the Australian horses that won over. And let's not forget Brazen Bow as well. Now, I know he ran second, but he ran the solo down the outside of the track, and to be honest with you, I've never been game enough to ask Chris Waller in an interview as to why, because I mean common sense says that the horses next to each other they tend to find a little bit more, and he's only been beaten. It was undrafted, won it on with the group on the far side, and he was only beaten by a narrow margin. And in all fairness, I think if you look at it, it was probably the run of the race that day. So the Australian horses can definitely do it, but you've got to look for the right sort of horse. I think with him, I think Chautauqua actually would have been the right sort of horse, the way he'd finish off. Again, John Hawkes, Team Hawkes. They always said he'd run a mile, which I think he would have, but the problem was he needed speed in any race, and they just didn't go quick enough over the mile. He probably needed something like Bullet Train, setting the pace for him. But yeah, you could bring in this case, an ex-Australian horse over to win the race. Obviously, you can't take it for granted. It's a tough race to win, but you've got to bring the right sort of horse. If they aimed him at it, I think he would be the right sort of horse.
So with the Australian horses over the years, what makes them so effective at Ascot and the King's Stand? We've seen Take Over Target, Scenic Blast, I think Miss Andretti, I think it was. Who was it? I can't remember now which one it was. And also we had another one whose name's just skipped my mind. But why is it at Ascot? What makes Australian sprinters such a force to be reckoned with when they come over here? Because when they come over here, we sort of stand up and take notes. So they don't come over here just for the fun of it.
Yeah, look, to be fair, I think there's a couple of things. I don't necessarily think we had a sort of best to take over Target over here. I think if you remember, was it Le Arc that beat him one day? And then they met in Japan and he absolutely annihilated him over here. There's a few things against the Australian horses when they come to Royal Ascot. The obvious one, obviously, the travel and the new conditions, but also a lot of the Australian horses, with few exceptions, don't like softer ground. I mean, Miss Andretti on the King's Stand on the Saturday in scintillating fashion. It poured rain on the Tuesday. She won the King's Stand. On the Saturday, she went around Diamond Jubilee and she hated it, absolutely hated it. You've got that, and also the undulating track. As I said, we've just got nothing like that in Australia. There's nothing that undulates. All right, Randwick's got a little bit of a hill, but compared to over here, you'd call it a minor speed bump, not a hill. So there's a lot against them. The other thing is too, and especially going back a few years ago, because you've got to remember, Smart's here, he was a very good sprinter. He was a genuine Group 1 sprinter in Australia, but I think he had a record of something like 4 or 5 wins from 16 starts over there. He certainly was not considered a superstar, but he came over here. And with all respects, I think at the time, with a few exceptions, I think the sprinting ranks over here have grown simply because you have your shuttle stallions and everything. And I don't think the opposition here at the time, with a few exceptions, were overly strong. Whereas in recent years, we have seen some world quality sprinters over here, horses like Blue, quite obviously, Batasha too, that sort of spring to mind. Although last year, I would say Batasha's side, it was pretty lean for sprinters overall. All right, we won the Breeders' Cup sprint and things like that. But I just think with the Australian horses, you've got to remember that that's basically what we breed for now. I mean, the industry would hate me saying that, but it's true. I'm not saying they don't try to breed a few to go over a longer trip, but these days what they do, if they want to stay, they come over here and look for something that's Group 3, Group 2 stand, and wants quicker ground, and they hope they can improve it a little bit. So yeah, we should be judged on our sprinters because that's what we breed for, and it's a lot now. As I said on the show last week, I know people see the Melbourne Cup and the Caulfield Cup and think, oh yeah, it's easy beating these Aussies, but they're the exception to the rule. We have very few races like that. We've got a few over 12 furlongs, I suppose, but you've got Guineas over a mile, a Derby over 10 furlongs and that type of thing. So I just think it's what we sort of aim at. If you take horses from here, the sprinters down to Australia, they'd find it tough to win in most years. I know Gordon Lord Byron did. I did a feature on it, but to be fair, that was on an absolute bog track, and I'm not taking anything away from him because he was a wonderful horse, wonderful story, wonderful connections. But that basically negated 3/4 of the Australian field. They just don't go on that sort of ground. And I think in the TJ Smith, to be fair, he ran a good race, but he's put back in his place there a little bit. And it's a bit like over here, you know, if you send a horse from Australia over here for a 10, 12 furlong race, it better be pretty bloody good. It's got to be Winks or So You Think type standard. Otherwise, they just won't get involved.
So do you think that's why certain horses, when they go, what we've seen Australian horses like Sham Express, I think he won a new market, I think, before coming for the July Cup. Red Kirk Warrior come to the July Cup. Brazen Bow come to the July Cup as well. And do you think that's why these Australian horses struggle at particularly Newmarket? Because it's sort of very undulating and uphill finish and sort of uphill down like type of roller coaster track and 6 furlongs too. Do you think that's the combination of both that just sometimes means that Australians just can't adapt to a track like the July course?
Yep, I would say absolutely, because they wouldn't have seen a track like that. The other thing is too, if you have a look, Aidan O'Brien has sent down a couple of July Cup winners to the Everest, and both have been annihilated. Now, to be fair, one of them went around on ground he hated, so you know we can probably forgive the run. But this just shows you the idiosyncrasies and the difficultness of international racing. Both of those July Cup winners, if you line them up in July Cup and brought over some of the Australian sprinters, you'd probably find it be the other way around. They'd be winning these races against horses that they've been destroyed by in Australia. The Australian horses basically get trained on hairpin tracks that are very flat. So when they get to somewhere like these big roomy courses here at Newmarket, or somewhere like that, mind you, Newcastle's quite a roomy track by Australian standards as well. They get a little bit lost. They get a bit of soft ground. I know even ground we call good over here would probably be soft ground. It might not be soft, but it would be soft ground in Australia. They get the undulations and they're racing out in the middle of a paddock somewhere compared to Australia. So, yeah, and conversely, it's the same for the Europeans. As I said, the 2 July Cup winners got smashed down there, but you can find genuine reasons for why they didn't perform on the day, apart from, the quality of the opposition.
And that's fine on that matter. With the sprinting division, I don't think this year the sprinting division is going to be as red hot as perhaps we've seen in recent years over in England. I know we've got Batash, but he's not getting any younger now. And I'm not too sure what else. Of course, we've got Glass Slippers, who was very good in America. And to beat American sprinters on their home soil takes a lot of doing because they come out the gates quick. There's no messing around. And I'm pretty confident they'll bring some over here as well. But I think it could be a good time for, say, an Australian or a Hong Kong horse, provided COVID allows it. I think it could be a perfect opportunity to bring something good over here and really test themselves against what looks a vulnerable division, in my opinion, the sprinting division here.
Yeah, and I'd love to see it. The problem you've got, and it's just a fact, the prize money in Australia is significant. With the Everest now, that's been around for 3 or 4 years. A lot of them are aiming at that. You've got to remember, I think it's now about a $15 million race. I mean, it's ridiculous money. And the other thing is, too, you've got to remember, it's a little bit, if you haven't got I understand all the Europeans going down for the big handicaps, the Caulfield Cup and the Melbourne Cup, because the prize money's phenomenal. You can send around horses that might be racing for a pot of 100,000 over here for an $8 million race. So, of course, they're going to go down. But to turn that around, if you've got an Australian sprinter coming over here and they've got to bypass races worth millions for a race worth 250,000 quid, it's probably not overly sensible unless you're trying to build a sire, commercial sense. But the other thing with all of that is, and I want to see international racing, but I think from an Australian perspective now, as far as the sprints go, there's a little bit of a feeling been there, done that. Like if you bring an Australian sprinter over here and it wins at Royal Ascot, people are excited. I mean, Australians are excited, but it's not like when Splasia did or when Black Caviar came over here and was protecting an unbeaten record and was the best sprinter in the world and arguably one of the greatest sprinters ever seen. Whereas now if you come over and you win a King's Stand and it's a wonderful achievement. I don't want this taken the wrong way, but I'm looking at this from a connections point of view. Well, hang on. If the trainer goes to the owner and says, well, why don't we take this horse to Royal Ascot? Well, what do we have to sacrifice? Well, we're going to miss this race, probably won't be able back in time for the Everest, or it might be a bit of a hard push. How much did you say the Diamond Jubilee was worth? Well, really? And has anyone ever done this before? Oh, yeah, it's been done a few times. It's kind of the carrot goes away a little bit, but I'm not trying to be negative because I want to see. And there's still going to be a lot of people out there. I know there's a lot of Australians, myself included, that regard Royal Ascot as the pinnacle flat meeting in the world. And I think there'd be a lot of owners out there that would just like to come over and have a runner at Royal Ascot. I know that Debbie Peters, and people say what they want about Winks. I know she really wanted to bring her over here. And where it kind of went wrong for a trip away was after the second Cox Plate, because the Cox Plate to Australians and Kiwis is like the Arc over here. It's a big weight for age race. No horse had ever won. Only one horse had ever won it 3 times, and that was the great Kingston Town. It would have been world class wherever he went. I think they looked at it, thought, we've got a chance to floor copper plates and we're never going to, we're not going to jeopardise that by doing a trip over, dare I say, to win a Queen Anne with, against horses rated 118. I mean, to be honest with you, come on, if she runs the form, you're kidding me.
I mean, I think we'll avoid the whole Winks debate. I've seen on social media many times before, engage with people about the whole Winks and Abel, blah, 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 who beats who, and then is Winks as good as she thinks she is? She's been running against Hartnell, who was a fairly decent horse from Mark Johnston, but over there she brushed him aside.
But Luca, the thing is, people say that. That's like me saying Zoffany gave Frankel a race. Hartnell never gave her a race. Not once did he ever lay down the gauntlet to her. She was toying with him. And the other thing is too, Hartnell improved a lot in Australia. You can't argue with that. Unless you think ratings a complete load of BS, he improved a hell of a lot. Like some horses go down there. We've had horses with classic form go down there and couldn't run outside on a dark night. Now, I don't think anyone in Australia is saying, well, that's reflective of their true form back home.
I mean, I think we're drifting off a bit of a tangent here, so we'll perhaps leave the Winks debate for another time. Moving into somewhat news I saw today as well regarding Neil Callan, it looks as though his time over in Hong Kong is perhaps going to come to an end. The Hong Kong Jockey Club officials, I'm just reading the article here, have stated that they want to speak to him in regards to his current licence, which means he could be on borrowed time. But Tim, we don't know too much about this yet, so it'd be hard to sort of dig into it a little bit too much without knowing the bare facts. And I know the Jockey Club, as we mentioned before recording, keep their cards tight to their chest in regards to this. But what would be your take on this whole scenario?
Well, he's been asked to show due cause as to why he should be able to keep his licence in Hong Kong, which is a shame because he's been very popular over there. He's a nice lad and he's done well over the years as well. My understanding is he was pulled into the steward's room, I think it was early last month, about a month ago, the 3rd of February, if I remember correctly. And he was given a 3-day ban for causing interference. I don't think he agreed with the verdict. Now, after that, we don't know what has happened, but there must have been some words. And as we know in Hong Kong, they're very strict. I'd be purely speculating. I'm not going to speculate. But in Neil's defence, as I said, over here to have your licence taken off you or told you're no longer wanted, you'd have to nearly murder a steward. That's not the case in Hong Kong. But I don't know what has happened, but what I do know is when it gets to this point, from what I was reading, there's only ever been 2 riders that have got to this point and been successful in sort of negotiating with the club and showing due cause as to why they should be able to keep their licence. So yes, at this point of time anyway, it's not looking good for Neil. And as I said, it is a real shame because he's a nice lad, he's done well over there, and he's very popular with just about everyone.
I know his licence, going back to Neil as well, he had his licence, he was only given a 6-month deal for the season, which got extended in January. Do you think that could have had a factor in some of the past sort of instances he's been involved in? I mean, he was involved in the Hong Kong International Jockeys Championship. He rode for Hong Kong as well, which is a very big thing. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have given him that privilege without earning it. And we know that Neil's been a fantastic jockey, not only just over here in England, but also in Hong Kong too. But yeah, it just seems a little bit sort of just, perhaps messy's the wrong word to use, but it just seems a bit sort of all over the place at the moment, regards to the situation, really.
Yeah, as I said, we don't really know too much, and I know Neil had a running with another jockey there last year, but the thing is, at some point, if you ride for long enough, you are going to have a running with a jockey. It's just the nature of the sport. It's a competitive atmosphere. He wouldn't be the first jockey in Hong Kong to sort of have a few words with another jockey. Zac Purton's been there, done that. So I don't think it's really got anything to do with that. And as I said, to the best of my knowledge anyway, he's very popular in Hong Kong. He wouldn't get rides if he wasn't. And he normally rides a few winners every season as well. So we can't really speculate as to what has happened, more than to say something's happened in the stewards' room and they're not happy about it and he's in a bit of trouble as far as maintaining his licence. And again, it's a shame.
So with the stewards over in Hong Kong, we touched upon this last week about how strict they are. In terms of sort of something like this, you perhaps wouldn't really hear about this much in the UK. I know we do see the stewards' inquiries shown on TV sometimes, and the riders over here seem to have respect for the stewards. In some cases they don't, but most of the time they do. But with the whole Hong Kong integrity, I was watching the race yesterday as well. They mentioned about if a trainer trains less than 16 wins, they pull them in and talk to them. So it seems as though certain things over in Hong Kong, they keep every stone, they don't leave any stone unturned compared to the UK where certain things like that, no one raises a blind eye to.
Yeah, there's a performance criteria. I think you've got to if you train less than 16 winners, you've got to explain as to why. And there can be mitigating circumstances to why you've had a poor season. Many leading trainers have had poor seasons. And I think it's basically a three-strike world. If it happens three times, then you're in a bit of trouble. I mean, I think Richard Gibson, the season before last, fell in under the quota and sort of had to have the little meeting with the jockey club. But I know people over here might think it's a little bit harsh, a little bit barbaric. But again, we touched on this last week. You've got to remember, if you go back 30 odd years ago or so, Hong Kong racing was in all sorts of trouble. I mean, there was corruption everywhere. There was, the Hong Kong mafia, if you like, sort of involved. And I remember Mal Johnson, Australian rider, Miracle Mal, a very good rider, went over to Hong Kong. I don't think anyone will ever know the full story, but he got bashed within an inch of his life while he was over there. And I think they kind of realised that they just had to. I don't know the exact history here, but they had to clean it up, and B, I think they saw an opportunity there because people like punting in Hong Kong and thought, well, actually, we can build a really good model. But if we're going to build this model that now the rest of the world look at and go, wow, isn't that great? We're going to have to clean it up. It's got to be respected. So I've said for a long time, I think they are a little bit. Well, not a little bit, a lot on the side of caution, but I'd much prefer it that way than the other way around, because we do see some things around the world. I'm not just going to say over here, where I think a lot of people sort of sit back and think, really, you're not going to pick that up, or you're only going to give that a fine or a ban? And I think there's look, I'll say straightforward, I think bans for jockeys over here in the whole are way too light. And the funny thing about that is I won't cop a lot of flack, because if you go and talk to riders individually, most of them agree.
So in terms of Neil Callan, if he does leave Hong Kong, do you think, I mean, we've seen him come back here a few years ago. I think he rode Hamza in a July Cup, or he rode Hamza in some race at Newmarket, I think in 2014 off the top of my head. If he was to come back here, I know he's got connections with Kevin Ryan. He's built a very good base with him over the past decade and 15, 20 years and such. But I think if he was to come back here, do you think with the calibre of jockey we've got now over here, would it be perhaps a little bit harder to sort of get on the certain regular, to sort of ride for the certain connections that he once had before leaving for Hong Kong?
I think you've got to get in with a couple of trainers, don't you? If you get in with a couple of trainers, you're fine. And if you don't, it don't matter how much talent you've got, you just won't find winners. Again, if it doesn't work out for him in Hong Kong, if this this due course doesn't work out, I'm not 100% sure he'll come back here. I mean, there'd be other options like Singapore, just down the road. No doubt if you ride winners in Hong Kong, people that are in Singapore would be aware of it. And Singapore have just lost a good rider that's gone to Hong Kong. So, there might be a vacancy there. Dare I say, you might even look at doing something international. You tend to find, Johnny Allen from Ireland is barely riding winners in Ireland. He's riding Group 1 winners in Australia. I don't know the complexities either, whether he get permission to ride in Australia or Singapore or anything like that. But if he came back here, he'd have to get in with the right trainer. The other thing is, too, I think Neil's probably about 42 now, or 41, 42, around there. I mean, who's to say he might not move on with his career? He might look at being a trainer or an assistant trainer. But again, we're just speculating. But he's a good lad. He's ridden a lot of winners. He was never the sort of rider, for whatever reason, that was going to win premierships over there. But by goodness, just about everyone supported him, and that's exactly what you need in Hong Kong.
So moving into Sunday's racing at Sha Tin, we've got a very strong a competitive card with a couple of Class 2s and 3s. Looking at the last race before we talk about your tips, Tim, Berlin Tango jumps out on me here. He had no sort of run at Happy Valley last time. Look, it's going to take a lot to win a race of this calibre. He's not shown too much since going to Hong Kong, but he was a classic trial winner at Kempton on the all-weather due to, obviously, the COVID situation, ruling that race out from being run at Sandown usually. Brazilian jockey Ruan Mayers takes a ride on Sunday. We just mentioned he's come over from Singapore on a short-term deal. Looking at that race, the last race before we move into your picks, Tim, where would you be aiming at?
Well, actually, one of my picks is in that race. I thought it looked very open on paper. I was quite taken with the runner Zardex, John Gosden, inmate last time out. Now, he was obviously quite a handy horse for John. He only had the 5 starts. He won 3 times. He managed to get his rating up to 102. He's had a couple of runs over there, and the first run he didn't show a lot, but by goodness, it was a good effort last time out at Happy Valley. Now, on that occasion, to be fair, the winner won well. he had them all sort of like about 2.5, 3 lengths back in behind. But you've really got to mark up the runner of Zara in that race. He jumped from the outside. He was taken to the back of the field. They walked the first half mile, and the rider, and understandably so, he took off around. He made an hurdle around the outside. I mean, ideally, again, he would have liked to have latched onto the back of something, but nothing peeled out, so he had to go. And he sustained this big, long run. And to sort of box on a run second the way he did, I thought it was an excellent effort. Now, I'm not for 1 second suggesting he was unlucky, because the winner who we flagged up actually won, and one with a leg in the air. But by goodness, he beat the others, and he beat, and he had a far harder commute than any of them. Steps up to 9 furlongs. The race you're talking about is a Class 2. 9 furlongs on the turf. I think Sha Tin will suit him. I know he's had the one run there and it didn't, he sort of bombed. That was over the 7 furlongs. I think there's a lot in his favour. To me, he doesn't strike me as a turn of foot horse, but he strikes me as a horse that can sustain a big long run. And I just think Sha Tin will work for him. The 9 furlongs will work for him. And I kind of think of a horse over here. But what he's done by running second there, he's shown that he's taken the Hong Kong conditions fairly quickly. I just think a horse that can get the 102 in 5 runs over here should be up to winning a Class 2 in Hong Kong, hopefully.
Also in that race, Super Football's going for the hat-trick. He was a good winner last time under a good ride from Zac Purton. Carroll I's in the plate this time around. How would you assess his chances as he looks to try and complete the hat-trick for Jimmy Ting here?
Yeah, well, part of the article I've got to put together, I've do a place pot for the ATR article, and he's one of the 3 I've put in that race. Definitely, he goes up in grade, but the side of that is go up in grade, go from the foot of the weights. It's a really nice angle. And again, one of the reasons I've picked this race as my each-way play, I'm fairly confident we'll get an each-way price. It just looks very open on paper, but he would definitely be shortlisting that. Don't read anything into Zac not riding him. I think he's down on 113, if I remember, and Zac rides, I think, a minimum, apart from maybe the big race, is around about 118. So he wouldn't be able to make the weight, and that's why Zac's not aboard.
So looking into the rest of the card, where would you be throwing your darts at the rest of the card, Tim?
Okay, race 8, Class 3 on the dirt over 6 furlongs at 8.35. There's a horse here called Lucky Fun. He's going to be my nap, best bet on the card. He's won 2 from 5. He was unlucky not to have won last time out. He's planet wide most of the way. And the winner of that race, he actually meets on £3 better terms. The winner of that race, I'm trying to remember his name now, I think it was Man U, if I remember correctly. I haven't got the field in front of me, but he... it
was Man Star, I think it was, wasn't it? Man Star?
Yeah.
I think it was.
Sorry. Thinking of football, aren't I? But he was the winner was on the paint all the way and just peeled off the back of the leaders and had the perfect run in transit. So I think, given that the Lucky Fun is far better drawing here, should have a far softer commute, is £3 better off. I think he's got the form covered, and that looks the form race going into this. So Lucky Fun's going to be my nap. My next best, I'm saving it all for last year. I've got races 8, 9 and 10 as my top 3, but my next best comes up in race 9 at 9.10. It's a Class 3 over the mile on the turf. Flagship Glory. Now, he was formerly with Roger Varian. He was known as established, and he was a 2-time winner for Roger as well, from only a handful of starts. He's only had 2 runs in Hong Kong. He's been placed in both of them. So once again, we know that he's in good health at the moment. He hit the line really strongly last time out when he ran second. That was after a slow getaway. Steps up to the mile here. Both his wins in the UK over the mile. Hood goes on. Purton on top as well. There's a lot to like. So Flagship Glory would be my next best on the card.
And just finally, in terms of talking about the dirt track at Sha Tin, well, I've seen the dirt track in Maidan. It can really find horses out, and there's no hiding place there. But with the sort of dirt track at Sha Tin, from observing sort of the races I've watched over the past couple of weeks, do you think there's a bias towards the front runners? Because sometimes the front runners go off, and it's sometimes harder for horses off the pace to really get into a race on the dirt. Yeah,
for reasons I don't understand, there definitely is sometimes. And quite often you don't find out until you're 3 or 4 races in. You can't work it out. But other times there's not. And now, the weather over there, as you can imagine, Hong Kong can get fairly hot at times. It does cool down at night, but it's certainly not the sort of weather we have over here, being that it's so close to the equator. I don't confess to being an expert as to working out why it happens, but you definitely do see it. Sometimes they can go from the front, they can run some pretty quick splits and just keep going. Other times they run average splits and nothing on the front wins. So, or when I say nothing on the front wins, horses at the back do run over the top of them. So sometimes you can see it, but I wouldn't say, at one point there in Dubai, if you go back a couple of years ago, a few of us latched onto it earlier, that you had to be on the front to win, simple as that. So you just went through all the front runners on the card and you put the pen through everything else. It's not like that. Not like that at all. But there are definitely some meetings where those on the front seem to have an advantage.
And just finally, one quick question with Berlin Tango. He's kept his name from when he ran over here. Some horses do, some horses don't. Is there a certain reason why some horses do keep their names when they come over from England?
Yeah, look, you can keep them. You don't have to keep them. Quite often, the Chinese owners, they are very superstitious. There's certain numbers and names they don't like for their own reasons, or there might not be a problem with the name, but they think if they might just want to change the name anyway to whatever it may be. Pinghai Star, actually, Pinghai Star, we were talking about earlier. We won the Derby in 2018. I can see why they want to change his name. He ran in Australia. His name was simply Ted. So, I mean, kind of, do you want your horse being called Ted? Obviously not. But yeah, look, sometimes it's just because they want to change the name. Sometimes it's got to do with luck or lucky numbers or lucky names and things like that.
That's been the Hong Kong View, episode 3 of the Hong Kong View with myself and Tim Carroll. We hope you've enjoyed, and we hope we can point you in the direction of some winners. And we'll see you all next week.